Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse Witch. This is Skadi. Hi Skadi. And we thought that today we could have a very nice little old-timey, for my channel, chat about a topic that's very prevalent in the witchcraft and also the wider magical community, and that is labels. Because I feel like there are like a million videos on YouTube, but also articles on blogs and on the interwebs about what kind of witch are you, and there are probably even like personality tests that tell you what kind of witch you should be and stuff like that. So I wanted to have a little chat about labels and names and if you have to label your practice and stuff, because I feel like all of these videos and articles give you the impression that you definitely need a label, that you need to label your practice, that you have to have a name. So people run around saying, I'm a green witch, I'm a divination witch, I'm an astro witch, and yeah, sometimes people even tumble into very appropriative territory, calling themselves titles that they probably don't deserve. So let's talk about it. First of all, let us start out with the obvious. Do you need a label? Do you have to label your magical practice or your spirituality? No, you definitely don't have to. Most people usually do, but I also know people that don't. And yeah, you don't necessarily have to. Sometimes finding just one label for your practice isn't even really possible, because of course your practice, especially as it develops, will be comprised of various different kinds of things that you like to do. It's usually not just one road that you go down, so finding one label is usually pretty hard. For myself, for example, I could not describe my practice with one label, so I usually don't. I still have to figure out which labels fit and which labels I'm even allowed to take on. I usually right now don't really label my practice, but a lot of people like to do it. And there is a very, very valid reason for that. It's basically the same thing as with, for example, the LGBT community. A lot of people run around saying like, why do you have to label your sexuality or your gender identity to a T? Like, why do you have to do that? That's not necessary. I see that argument being especially put towards people on the asexuality spectrum, or people maybe that are non-binary, because people are like, well, if you don't give a fuck about gender, why do you have to give yourself a label? And there's just one very valid reason, and that is that you don't want to constantly basically explain all of it. If you have one label and people have like a general image of what that means, that label, then you can give them that one label and you don't have to explain your whole identity basically. So for example, for me, I identify as non-binary, and people usually have some kind of image that comes with that, even if they don't know. Hi Skadi. Even if they don't know what the definition of being non-binary is, they usually have an image that comes with that, so they can kind of imagine what that means for me. So that means I don't have to explain my gender identity with them, because it's complicated. So it's nice not to have to really explain it. And it's the same thing with witchcraft. So for example, if you like to work with plants, for example, it's nice to not have to describe it or describe your whole practice. It's nice to just say, I'm a green witch. Or I don't know, if you're very much into astronomy and astrology and you like to work with the planets and stuff, it's nice to just say, I'm an astro witch or an astro practitioner. Instead of having to explain, I'm into astronomy and astrology, I like to maybe time my magical practices with the moon cycles or with the planetary hours and stuff, you know? Because astro witch already makes you think of some practice. And with that one label, you avoid having to describe your whole entire practice to a person. So that's pretty handy. That's why usually people do it. It also makes research easier, because now you can just Google green witchcraft, astro witchcraft, whatever type of witchcraft, you know. Of course, I mean, that's how language works. If you have a name for something, you can talk about it and it's easier to communicate. So it makes research easier. So having labels definitely very, very valid. Do you need a label? No, it's totally fine to just call yourself. I mean, a witch. A witch already is a label, right? Witchcraft is already a specific kind of magical practice. You could also just call yourself a magical practitioner. You don't even have to label yourself as a witch. Magical practitioner, very general term, totally fine to use. What I feel is just very, very important is if you want to label yourself, then definitely take a look at that label, maybe do some research about that label and find out what it actually means. Apart from like the newer labels, you know, like divination witch or astro witch or sea witch, like there are so many new labels that don't really come with a cultural significance. Those labels, slap them onto yourself as much as you like, no problem. But there are labels and names for specific practices that mean very, very, very specific things, and they don't only describe a practice, they also come with a role in your community, for example, or they come with a specific initiatory rite that you have to go through. But I see people running around, for example, calling themselves shaman, which in general is a kind of murky territory. I will definitely make a video on that at some point, because like the entire history of the term shaman and shamanic practices and stuff is extremely interesting and kind of complicated. And yeah, but people run around calling themselves shaman. Why? Probably because they like working with spirits, they like to work with the other worlds and traveling the other worlds and things like that. And then I guess they find out that there's such a thing as shamanic practices, and then they call themselves a shaman. But there's a big difference between calling yourself a shamanic practitioner and a shaman, because a shamanic practitioner is just someone who works with shamanic practices, someone who incorporates shamanic practices into their spirituality or their magical practice or whatever. But shamanic practitioner and shaman is not the same thing. A shaman is someone who has a very, very specific role in the community that they live in. So calling yourself a shaman, if you don't have that very specific role in your community, or if you don't even have a community in which you could fulfill a role, then you're not a shaman. And that's, for example, the same thing with the term vulva, which I see people running around calling themselves vulva all the time, maybe because they like practicing Seidr or whatever they think is Seidr, or maybe because they just simply are a heathen and they like to practice Nordic kinds of magical traditions. But that doesn't make you a vulva. A vulva is pretty similar to a shaman. They have a very, very specific role in their community. And if you aren't that, then you aren't a vulva. Like, just because you like practicing Seidr or other types of Nordic magical practices, that doesn't make you a vulva. And that's just very, 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 very important, because it's very, very culturally insensitive, sometimes even appropriative, to just call yourself something without actually fulfilling that role. That's something that I feel like is very, very important with labels and names. Please do your proper research on that term. Sometimes it can take quite some time, but you will maybe find alternative terms that are perfectly fine to use. For example, if you're someone who likes to practice Seidr, but you aren't a vulva, then don't call yourself a vulva. Maybe call yourself Seidr kona or Seidr madr, or I actually don't remember what the gender neutral term is, but there is one. There are like a million different terms that you can call yourself. It's the same thing with witch. Not everyone who practices any type of magical practice is a witch, in my opinion. But there are a million different things that you can call yourself. You can be a folk practitioner and not be a witch. You could be, I don't know, a cunning person and not be a witch. You could be some kind of magical practitioner, a magician, and not be a witch, you know? They're just different things. So just make sure that you research the term and the label that you find and that you feel like applies to you, because maybe it doesn't in hindsight. And you probably don't want to be culturally insensitive, right? Something else that I'm just rambling at this point, but something else that I feel like with labels, it's okay to have multiple labels. Like, you can call yourself a green divination witch, or a green Wiccan, a green ceremonial practitioner, although I wonder what that would look like. But you can have multiple labels, but like, if you end up having like 10 labels, then maybe the labels don't make a lot of sense anymore. Because if you have 10 labels and you have to describe all of these 10 labels to people, then maybe you could instead just describe your practice. Labels are supposed to make something shorter, so make sure to use a label that makes sense for your practice, so you don't have to use like 10. But yeah, you definitely don't have to. And I'm wondering right now, like, if I had to give myself a label, that's pretty hard, because there are so many practices I like to get into. They all kind of have something to do with Scandinavia and in general like the Nordic countries, but they're not all pre-Christian, they are not all folk magic. There are various different things that I like to get into, so I don't feel like there's a proper label for that. I mean, maybe my channel name is just that, like I'm a Nordic witch, maybe that makes sense. But for example, I do not feel comfortable calling myself a Scandinavian folk practitioner yet, or a trolldom practitioner, because I just don't feel like I am there yet, so I don't like to assume that label already. Because I feel like there has to come more with a label than just an interest in something. Just because I'm interested in something and I dabble in something, I feel like that doesn't give me the right to assume that name or that label. So I would have to have more experience to call myself a Scandinavian folk practitioner. But that's just my random opinion. Of course, you can have like various different opinions on that. But they definitely can make life easier. And it can be very fun to kind of figure out what kinds of labels are out there, because maybe there are practices out there that you don't even know about yet. And if you kind of research some labels, maybe you find practices that you want to experience and try out, and maybe you can find something that you end up really liking. Maybe tell me in the comments what you think about labels. So yeah, with that being said, that's actually everything that I wanted to talk about. This was supposed to be more of a like chill, sit down and chat video. That's also why I'm in my old filming location. I feel like that's always my sit down and chat with a cup of tea location. It's pretty chill. I like it. It's also my couch, so of course it's chill. But with that being said, as always, Patreon shout out. Thank you so much to Segregated Facial Hair, nice name, Kelly, Lisa, Brittany, Amber, Celine, Small Kata, Josh, Virginie, Joseph, Elinura, David, Christine, Rixie Business, Valo, Annalena, Bast, Kirby, Ashley, Erica, Anna, Kristen, John, Phoenix, Anton, Jenny, Maggie, Misty, Amy, Colette, Timothy, Coffee, or the Honorary Gossip Squirrel, and last but definitely not least, Bjorn. Thank you so much as always. This means the world to me. I hope you enjoyed this little sit down and chatty video. If you did, definitely make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up, because that really helps, and write a comment, definitely helps with the algorithm. If you want to stay up to date with my videos, since the subscription box isn't really that reliable anymore, definitely make sure to ring the bell down below. Of course, you can check out all of my other socials or my shop for witchy, sustainably and ethically sourced witchy goods. And of course, if you want to support me, you can check out my Patreon. And with that being said, I will see you in the next video. Bye!